Welcome to the Kim B. Davis Show. We are here live via remote with Tamekia Nixon, Vice President of Marketing for Detroit Regional Partnership. She is the former Communications Director for the City of Detroit Health Department. And yes, we are still social distancing during this quarantine. But today we're going to be talking about staying relevant and current in today's market with marketing and communications expert Tamekia Nixon. Good morning, Tamekia. How are you?
Good morning, Kim. How are you? Thank you for having me today.
Thank you for being on the show. First off, I always like to start off with some basics. First off, tell us, what is marketing?
Absolutely. So marketing is your calling card. It's how you address your customers. It's the message that you give to them. It's how you talk to them. It's knowing their language and knowing when you should deliver that particular message to them. So it's a plethora of things when you look at from shopping purchases, when you look at investors and when they're looking to add additional sites. You know, what cities are they looking at? Are they looking at Chicago? Are they looking at Atlanta? Are they looking at California? What is it that you can do to make them be drawn to Detroit or to the Metro Detroit area or Southeast Michigan? And here in Southeast Michigan, we have so many assets. So it's really an opportunity to tell your story to the world.
That's fascinating. So if we're in this quarantine, we've been in this quarantine for about 7 weeks now.
Yeah.
We're approaching 8 weeks. So we're looking at 2 months of business that has been interrupted. Whether you are in corporate, whether you're a nonprofit, you're a city government, all of that has been pushed to a standstill.
Yeah.
What would you advise a business that now that we're in quarantine, how they can stay relevant depending on their type of product that they provide or the service they provide? Because they might feel like, well, this isn't an essential service. So how do we connect with our audience?
Well, the first thing, Kim, is I would have to say, because we live in the digital age world, our mobile devices, if you will, they are really a saving agent. And so it's really an opportunity to hone in and to sharpen your professional toolkit, if you will. Right now, there are numerous webinars out there that can teach you anything, whether you need to sharpen your skill set on the computer, whether it's writing, even the talk show that we have today. It's an opportunity to become innovative and also to build things, because we know that eventually we are going to come out of this pandemic. And so while we're here, what is it that you can do? Is it a website that you can develop? Is it increasing your following? Is it developing content? Is it taking that content and developing a digital campaign around that? So again, it provides an opportunity to think outside of the box and to be innovative. When you look at times of crisis, it's really an opportunity to show who's going to really show up. And it is an opportunity to get uncomfortable. So again, show up for yourself and get out of that box. I mean, if you're home, if you have access to the internet, there's really no excuse. And I think too, giving yourself timelines. Oftentimes in the workplace, we have deadlines. And so I think being accountable to yourself and giving yourself a timeline as to when you're going to do things. And even if you're looking at week by week, what you're going to do to get to those goals is very critical. I know oftentimes at the top of the year, we say, oh, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Well, what are the steps to get to X, Y, and Z? And so that's why it is important to write down the plan and to do a weekly checklist to see if you are in bounds of that plan. Because if you look at it, we're almost halfway through the year. So being accountable to yourself, it's really key. And I also think during this time to read from the experts. I mean, I'm always looking at books and things. I currently have this book here called Emotional Intelligence by R. Stevens. And so again, just before the world was moving so fast, I'm an avid reader, but I had even slowed down. So here's an opportunity for me to pick up this book and read. Uh, I had picked up Michelle Obama's book, Becoming. So now there's an opportunity for me to actually pick up that book and read it as well. So um, this can actually be a time of building, internal building for our professional as well as our personal endeavors.
So I want to piggyback off on that a little bit. So I'm currently reading Michelle Obama's book. Also, I'm towards the end of the book, and she's talking about Barack Obama's first run for presidency, and she's talking about in the chapter I'm on, chapter 17. She's talking about having that downtime, even in the midst of campaigning. It's Malia's birthday. And how do they celebrate, yet at the same time still attend a 4th of July parade and still patriotic and celebrate with the country? What would you advise a business owner, nonprofit, elected official in terms of trying to communicate, but yet trying to find that balance in business?
Well, sometimes I think you have to take off the cape, and it's the Superwoman cape that we often wear. And really, I think going back to the list of priorities and really identifying what can be done in that day. I also think too it's an opportunity for us to hand off some things. Sometimes we feel as if we're the only ones that can do it. So I think if there's an opportunity where you can hand off a project to someone, you certainly should. So again, being able to uh, give away assignments to people, that's really key. Yeah.
Delegation is very important, and you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. A
Yeah.
lot of us wear that cape. Tameka, I know you've worn that cape before when there have been crises within
Mhm.
the city. I know
Mhm.
I've worn that cape on a variety of projects that I've worked. I know my
Mhm.
producer has worn that cape. We all do that, and we all sort of
Yes.
step into that role, but we do need to learn how to step back and ask for help and reach out to others who have that expert advice. That is great information. So now let's go back to marketing. How do we know if a campaign is working? You talked a lot about being digital and being savvy with social media. What are some things that you look for on social media that will tell you if a campaign is working?
Well, I think it's important to measure the success of the campaign. Right now, in the information age, there are so many platforms, various marketing automation platforms. A lot of them are very expensive, but if one has it within the budget, that's one way. They have various programs called Salesforce, Pardot, HubSpot, um, Meltwater. So there are ways that you can measure, but also too, I think it's important to look at what the engagement level is. Are people sharing your information? Are they retweeting it, liking it? And also too, what is the what I call the water cooler conversation? Is there an excitement? Are people um, excited about what you've done? I'll give an example. In my current role, last week was Economic Development Week. And initially, prior to the pandemic, there was a plan of action to do these very high level videos with executives throughout the 11 county Southeast Michigan. But obviously, we couldn't do that. And so we still needed to make this happen. And so my team, we launched this digital campaign with simply, once again, this mobile device. And we just had persons to upload a 1 to 2 minute video sort of highlighting what they've been doing to provide support during the pandemic. And we were able to add music and pictures and words, and it really was well received. And so again, just an opportunity. How do you measure success? Again, when people are talking about it, when they're sharing it. And then I think too, you just kind of get a feel for when you're on the right track. And again, during this time, this is new to everyone. I think the last major pandemic was 102 years ago, the 1918
Mhm.
Spanish flu or pandemic. And so uh, we're kind of charting what is it, uncharted territories here, if you will. And so it really is an opportunity to again step outside the box, color outside the lines, and do something different. And knowing that everything doesn't have to be perfect while you're doing it. I mean, obviously, you want to get it as close to perfection as possible, but sometimes you just need to get it out there and then you can perfect it along the way.
So you mentioned a lot of things. You talked about water cooler conversation.
Hmm.
And I know a lot of people will think literal water cooler conversation, but how
Hmm.
do you see this pandemic impacting how marketing is done? Do you think that things will change or things will go back to the way that they were once we open back up? What are your thoughts?
I think that there will be a greater and higher level of appreciation for the marketing. Oftentimes in budgets, if there is a budget cut, a lot of companies will, or have in the past, because I'm not saying that it happened today, but in the past, organizations have cut marketing. I think right now, while the world is at a pause, if you will, it really highlights and elevates the importance of marketing, and really still knowing the importance of while we're pausing, there's still work that needs to be done. And also, too, I think it's also important to note that business is still happening. So, for example, if persons were traveling outside of the US or domestically, now those calls, it can be done, via a Skype call or Microsoft Teams or a go-to meeting. And so it really causes you to go back to that playbook and rethink as to how are you doing business? Do we need to spend the hundreds and thousands of dollars in the budget to fly out our teams annually to close a deal? Or, can we shorten that budget and still get the results done? Maybe if we're traveling 20 times throughout the year again, maybe it's just 2 visits. So again, it causes you to go back to that playbook and to make adjustments. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a good thing too. I also think when you look at how people are productive in the workplace, um, this really has shown that people can work from home and be productive. And actually, they may be more productive because you may have less distractions, if you will, and probably that 8-hour workday is really a full 8 hours of solid work, if you will. Sometimes in many office settings, there can be distractions with various meetings and phone calls and what are we going to do for lunch. But again, when this is kind of you one on one going at the work, you do get a lot more done.
Excellent, excellent. So I want to ask you a question. Um, I've noticed that there are several CEOs who have put out personal messages during this pandemic, encouraging people to stay home, talking about their business, but yet saying, we'll wait for you. And when we come back and the world is back again, we'll be here waiting for you. For me, that's a powerful message. And it made me want to go and click on that company's website and just to hear some of the things that they're doing. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a very smart message. Number one, I think it's really important to hear from our leadership and from our business leaders. That's key because it shows strength and unity. I also think too that we're living in a time where people are kind of seeking to see who has the wisdom and what direction people should follow. Um, I also think from a common sense perspective, we have to get this pandemic under control. So knowing that it is very wise to listen to what the health professionals and the epidemiologists and the scientists to know, that we need to get this curve down and we need to completely flatten this curve before we can really get back to business or do things as we did before. And again, we may never ever get back to doing things the way how we did them, 7 weeks ago. But knowing too that that's okay. And, we have gone through a number of challenges as a people. and just as humans here on this earth. And again, it provides an opportunity for us to come together and say, hey, basically, how can you make what is it, lemons out of lemon? How do you make lemonade out of lemons? And so again, when you look at tragedy or crises, it really is an opportunity for persons to show up. So again, it's like, how do you want to show up? And then too, I feel as if it's an opportunity for people that have been quiet. You have a voice. You have a captivated audience, and I keep going back to our mobile devices and our social media, but you do have a captivated audience where people will listen to what you have to say. So the platform is there, and it's just a matter of getting outside of your comfort zone, as explained earlier, and speaking your truth.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to take a station break, and we'll be right back with Tamekia Nixon talking about staying relevant and current in today's society. You're watching The Kim B. Davis Show. Welcome back to The Kim B. Davis Show. This morning, we're talking with Tamekia Nixon, Vice President of Marketing for the Detroit Regional Partnership, and she's talking to us about staying relevant and current in today's society. So Tamekia, I want to switch gears because you were talking about communications before our last break. And one of the things that I noticed that sometimes leaders struggle with their messaging. What should the answer be if there is such a single answer when an executive or a elected official or a leader of a company makes a goof, meaning they did something bad on social media, maybe it was taken out of context. And the reason I bring this up is because, again, I'm reading Michelle Obama's book also. And one of the things that she talks about was she made a stump speech for her husband before he was elected president the first time, and how her message was taken out of context. What advice, as a marketing and communications professional, would you advise someone to do if their message is taken out of context? Because I know during quarantine, there have been people who've said things, they meant it in love and sincerity, but it was taken in a different manner and it turned into a firestorm for them. So what would your advice be?
Well, number one, I think that whenever we speak before a camera or deliver anything externally, we have to be very intentional. Number one, we always have to ask ourselves, why are we putting out this communication? I think that's the first thing. And once you're able to support why you're doing it, and then honestly, too, looking at the vehicles that you will distribute it, knowing your key audience is key. I'll give you an example with messaging, maybe something that is said in the African American community. In other communities, it may not be appropriate to say that. So I think it's key to always know who your audience is. So whether it's business, whether it's the culture, knowing the age, the demographics, knowing the space that you're in is key. Key on how people will interpret it, or how people will be forgiving if you did make a blooper, if you will. The other thing is too, I think if there is a mistake, just getting in front of things fast, not letting things linger too long. If there was a mistake, if you have an opportunity to go out there and try to explain it and then let it go. I also think if you need reinforcement, it's key to have people that have a good name to come back and to support you and to reiterate what you were trying to do. But again, I think being intentional, knowing why you're delivering the message and knowing your key audience. And again, if you made a mistake, just go ahead and clean it up. Don't spend a lot of time around it. Yeah.
I remember because you had some crises that were happening at the city health department, and there were some firestorms. And I remember admiring the fact that you were able to do that under such calm pressure. So that was
Thank you, Kim. Thank
That
you.
was a good thing. So back to marketing. What are some basic components that a company or an organization should have in their toolkit?
Number one, I think it's imperative you got to have the right marketing team in place. I think that that's key, looking at who your players are. When you look at things in terms of sports, making sure that you have your Michael Jordans and your Kobe's and your Isaiah Thomases on board and ready to rock and roll. So ensuring that you have a dynamic team that can deliver. The other thing too is ensuring that you have a plan. I talked a little bit earlier about this playbook. And so that is important, even if you have to shift the plan, knowing that you do have something that you can go back to, and knowing that even if, again, if you have to make an adjustment, that's fine, but having a playbook is key. The other key thing is having a website that's relevant. And even with that, knowing that every website needs a tune up. And so, having the resources and the tools for the tune up to stay relevant. Also, to being relevant in the digital marketing space is really key when you're looking at digital ads, highly utilizing your social media platforms. And then also, too, getting back to some of the traditional pieces, picking up the telephone is really key. Just checking on people to see how you can support them and showing up where you can. Those are key marketing pieces that I think you got to have in place too. Also, think it's important to partner. Um, a lot of times I think two heads are better than one. And so being able to partner with those across the aisle is really key, in addition to looking at what your competition is doing. That's really important. So not only just knowing what's happening here in Metro Detroit, but knowing what's happening in Dallas and what's happening in Atlanta, in Chicago, and et cetera, and just being ahead of the curve, if you will, I think is really important.
So you really have to stay knowledgeable, as you're saying, about what's actually happening out in the world.
Yeah, and I think so. And I think also being able to pivot fast too. Again, we know that the way that we operated, 7 weeks ago, there certainly has to have to be some adjustments there. So being able to, again, making sure that you have the internet, making sure that you have mobile devices, making sure that you're comfortable in front of the camera. I'm just looking at, wow, 7 weeks ago, would we have even done this phone call, or would it have been something like, okay, it's on my list of things to do? But again, because we're in this time, again, it goes back to being more intentional to make things happen.
Absolutely. So one last question before we go. If a company or an organization finds that they have lost relevancy, what is something that you would do or you would advise them to do to help them bring back up their market awareness?
Yeah, so I think it's important to do like a SWOT analysis to look at what their strengths are, their weaknesses, the opportunities. I think even when things are going well, you should always be assessing, how are we doing? A lot of times when it's gotten to that point where you're failing, there were, nuggets along the way showing you, hey, something's happening here. So I think, again, going back to weekly, looking at what the plan of action is, and again, holding yourself accountable and working with a team and leadership that's also going to, make you be held accountable. So I think we have to be preventative. How do we avoid that? You gotta start early. Before that happens, it's like the faucet that continues to drip before you have to call the plumber. You know that it's been dripping for weeks at a time. You've heard it, you saw it, and so what are we going to do about it? And so I think catching that problem in its early stages is a lot easier. But even if we do wait towards the end, there's always, what I call a second chance, a third chance, where you can go in and redeem yourself. And oftentimes that does happen. I think having good mentorship is key. I think having outside persons who are not close to it, who can give you honest feedback as to, um, what you can do that would be in alignment with best practices. That's key. And I think that there are so many benchmark tools out there that one can glean from. I think it's imperative to take advantage of those tools that are out there. And most of these tools are readily available online. You don't even have to purchase a number of these things. Many of them too, you can just go on YouTube. But then too, success leaves clues, and reading books and looking at seminars and looking at what do successful people do. Read the articles, if you will. I think nowadays you don't necessarily have to have a personal relationship with that person to glean what their success track record looks like. So again, looking at self-assessment and then business assessment. And that should be done on a regular basis.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tamekia Nixon, for sharing
Thank
these nuggets with us, for talking to us about marketing and communications, and telling us that we need to be aware, we need to assess, and always ready to pivot and move when we need to. And having that person who can look at it with fresh eyes and be independent and assess it for us and help us, and never being afraid to reach out. Thank you so much for that. If someone wanted to talk with you, pick your brain, are you taking clients? Is there a way that we can reach out to you?
Well, people can always reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. So Tamekia Ashford, which is my maiden name. Most people may still know me by Tamekia Ashford, but Tamekia Ashford Nixon. And they can simply just inbox me on LinkedIn.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Tamekia, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. And I want to say has been an honor. I love what you're doing here, Kim.
Thank you.
I think it's a phenomenal platform. And thank you for having me. This is phenomenal. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamekia. I so appreciate you. Thank you for those kind words.
Thank you.
You have been watching the Kim B. Davis Show, and I'm encouraging you to stay home, stay safe, continue to wash your hands, eat your veggies, take your vitamins, and remember, be magnificent.